So like I said earlier, we've talked about sort of classification in general and why we classify things, how we classify things, how we name species. So now we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about those 6 kingdoms that we just named. Talk about some of their characteristics, some examples of each of them. Okay, so let's name them first. Okay, so we can start with the easiest one. Feel free to draw some shorts on this guy if you'd like, if it makes you feel better. I don't know why. I feel bad for him. He got the bird pecking at his head, a fish biting him in the side, snake attacking him, and the mouse looking at him awkwardly. Maybe if he had some clothes on, his situation would be better. All right. Anyway, so what kingdom? Raise your hand, please. Tatum.
Animal.
Obviously, animal kingdom. Yes, that's the animal kingdom. Includes all of those species, as well as some other things. We're going to talk about the kingdoms, but some things you maybe wouldn't think of as animals are actually animals. Things like a starfish. Sometimes people don't think that insects are animals, or a mussel, clam, coral. All those things are actually animals. All right, how about the tree, the cactus, the radish, the flowers? Obviously this one, Nathan? Plants. This one, yeah, just think about me, Abby. Yeah, this is these are the fungi. Fungi. So mushrooms, slime, molds, mold, yeast, all of those things are in the fungi kingdom. Then we get down to some of these kingdoms, which you're probably not as familiar with. All of them are basically single-celled organisms. What would this one be? Gavin?
Bacteria.
Not quite. These are bacteria over here. These are a little bit larger, more complex than.
I lost it. Wait, I have a question. Why is there 5 kingdoms when there's 6 of there?
Jake?
6 in the 5
Okay.
Protis?
Yeah, those are Protists.
Do we need those?
Yep. And these are 2 kingdoms combined into one.
I thought that was Archaea.
Yeah, there's Archaea, and then the other missing one, bacteria.
Wait, bacteria and Archaea are the same thing?
No, they're not the same thing, but we just didn't have, because this drawing was made before Archaea was used very often. Archaea is actually a pretty new group of organisms that scientists didn't know existed until discovering them under certain extreme conditions. We'll talk about that in a little while. So what we're going to be discussing are the characteristics of each kingdom. And we're going to keep referring back to sort of 3 key characteristics. The first one is whether or not the cells have a nucleus. So when we talked about cells, we were basically talking about plant and animal cells, and they had a nucleus. But there are some types of living things when within their cells, their DNA and their chromosomes are not surrounded by a nuclear membrane. Their DNA is just kind of all spread throughout the cell. And this would be an example here. You see like these little lines represent DNA. Okay, so this is a cell without a nucleus. This is a cell where there is a nuclear membrane surrounding that DNA. So that's an important difference. So the words we use for this are prokaryote and eukaryote. Now, if you know the roots of these words and some prefixes, you can figure out what they mean. The prefix pro. Like if you read a book, where's the prologue? The beginning. It's like before the story starts is the prologue. Pro means before. The prefix "u" before a word, it means true. And then the root "karyo" means having to do with the DNA, the nucleus. So you could probably figure out then what these words mean. So what do you think prokaryote means? cells would be a prokaryote? Yeah, one on the left. Prokaryote is a cell that's very simple. It doesn't have a nuclear membrane and doesn't have other membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria or.
Is that the one on the left?
Yep. So this one would be a prokaryote. So this one obviously then is a eukaryote. It is a more complex cell. Generally, they're larger. They have a nucleus with a nuclear membrane. They have other organelles usually that are bound with membranes. And this is sometimes one that students have trouble remembering. So just two simple rhymes can help you remember it. Pro rhymes with no. Prokaryotes have no nucleus. Eu rhymes with do because eukaryotes do have a nucleus. So if you can remember those things, you can remember what these words mean. So that's one characteristic we look at. Are the cells of these kingdoms, do they have a nucleus or not? Another factor we look at is how many cells make up that living organism. Some living things are what we call unicellular. Anyone tell me what that would mean? They're unicellular. Tatum?
One cell?
Yeah, they're one cell. Like a unicycle has one wheel. Unicellular means they're organisms that are made of just one single cell. Can you tell me an example of something that's unicellular? Kendall? Bacteria, correct. Then the opposite of unicellular is multicellular. Multicellular are organisms that are made of many cells, like us. We're made of trillions of cells working together to form one complete organism. So that's the other factor we look at. Does it have a nucleus or not? Is it made of one cell or many cells? And then the third is about its nutrition. Living organisms can either be heterotrophs or autotrophs. And this is about how they obtain energy. What does an autotroph mean? I think this is a term you have heard before, autotroph. Troph means food. Kendall?
They get their energy from the sun.
Yes, they're able to make their own food. Like, auto means self. Troph means food. So like self-feeding. These are organisms that make their own food. Through what process usually? Through photosynthesis. So things like plants, for example, are autotrophs. Other organisms are heterotrophs. How do they obtain energy? By food, by eating other things. They cannot make their own food. They have to eat other organisms in order to obtain energy.
Wait, go back.
So what we're going to do is look at these 6 kingdoms and talk about their characteristics and figure out, are they autotroph or heterotroph, unicellular or multicellular, prokaryote or eukaryote. So we'll start with the most familiar one, the animal kingdom. And these are probably what you're most familiar with. It's actually the largest of the kingdoms of identified species. So let's think about those 3 characteristics. Do animal cells contain a nucleus in them?
Yes.
They do. So raise your hand if you could tell me, what's the term we use for groups that have a nucleus in their cell? Natalie? Eukaryote. Are animals made of one cell or many? Many. Are animals autotrophs or heterotrophs?
Heterotrophs.
Right. So animals, their characteristics are that they're multicellular, they're eukaryotic cells, and they're heterotrophs.
I have a question.
Yes.
For like the eukaryote, don't they both have nucleus?
Both what?
The-
Prokaryote and eukaryote?
Yeah.
No, prokaryotes have no nucleus.
I thought they just have a nuclear membrane.
Well, that's what makes a nucleus, is that it's a nuclear membrane. Their DNA is just spread throughout the cytoplasm, not enclosed in a membrane. So obviously there's lots of examples we could list of plants, you know, of animals, a spider, a penguin, a cat, an insect, a sponge, a sand dollar, a clam, a lobster, an alligator, a monkey, a dog, you know, all these are animals, obviously. We'll talk about that because
What? No. That's a big sponge.
we're going to talk about that later on in our unit. We're going to talk about each kingdom one at a time. And when we get to animals, you're going to see different types of animals, including sponges and cnidarians. Yes. So that's fairly easy because we're familiar with animals. Plants. I bet you can name these three characteristics for plants as well. So unicellular or multicellular? Multi. Eukaryote or prokaryote? No. When we looked at plant cells, is there a nucleus? Yes. So what's the word for that? U rhymes with do. They do have a nucleus. They're eukaryotes. Autotroph or heterotroph? These are plants. What are plants?
Oh no, that's
Autotroph. So plants are multicellular, eukaryote, and autotroph. So obviously plants are lots of things we're familiar with, trees or corn, flowers, apples, all sorts of different things. Okay, now we start to get to some of the kingdoms maybe you're not as familiar with. So fungi. So fungi include things like mushrooms. So what's your guess? Are they unicellular or multicellular?
Unicellular.
Mushrooms are multicellular, but there are some unicellular fungi. And we'll talk about what they are in a minute. So really, fungi are both unicellular and multicellular. They are eukaryotes. They do have their DNA contained within a nuclear membrane. How about their nutrition? What would you say? How does a mushroom get energy? It's not. Does it? Are they like plants? Abby?
Does it get it from like the ground?
Sort of.
From the roots?
They are decomposers. They break down dead organisms, organic matter. So would you say is that a heterotroph or autotroph? Heterotroph. They break down, if you imagine, like if you're walking through the forest, you come across a rotting log, there might be mushrooms growing out of it. That's because they're using that rotting wood as their source of energy. It's basically what they're eating. We're going to talk about them a little later on, but basically they have digestive enzymes they secrete which break down the organic matter. So examples, yeast are a type of fungus. So have you guys used yeast at home in careers yet? No?
Well, we're going to use it.
Probably will. What do you know about yeast? Or maybe use it at home to make bread or dough or something?
Don't you really put it in a refrigerator so it gets bigger?
Well, eventually you might, but So you can buy yeast like in a little foil packet, and if you open that up, it looks like just little round, little balls.
Like they're like risers kind of?
Yeah, if you mix, usually you mix the yeast with like some warm water and a little bit of sugar, and then you mix it in with your flour when you're making dough. What happens is the yeast is activated and basically comes back, not that it was dead, but becomes active. And what it does is it takes in sugar and releases as an end product carbon dioxide. And those bubbles of carbon dioxide, what do they do to your dough? Cause it to get bigger, causes it to rise. When you slice into a loaf of bread, the little like pockets you see in there, those pockets came from carbon dioxide that the yeast had released, and that's why the dough rose. Yeast are used in making alcoholic beverages as well, because some yeast produce alcohol as one of their byproducts. So yeast are a type of fungus. So are mushrooms, and mold as well. You know, if you leave a piece of bread out, it gets moldy. That hairy stuff growing on your bread is a living organism. It's from the fungi kingdom.
Can't you get mold if you like leave something like for a long time, like bread?
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah, or like mold can grow in like wet areas, like if you like don't clean your shower or something for a long time, mold could start to grow. If your basement floods and you don't dry it out thoroughly, mold can form. So that's why people make sure
I
they.
never knew, but like if you ate mold, would that be like really sensitive?
Not necessarily. I mean, mold inhaling mold spores, like black mold and stuff, is bad for you. But like mold on bread is not gonna hurt you generally. I usually just scrape it off if it's not too bad and eat the bread anyway.
That's
It's fine. I don't like to waste things. All right, Tatum. All right, guys, one at a time, please.
So you were like walking through like the woods and you see a mountain and you wanted to classify it.
A mountain?
Yeah, where would you go? Like,
This is
what
only
kingdom?
for living organisms.
Mountains are living.
The Grand Mountain.
So you can identify species that live on the mountain, but a mountain is a geographic feature. It's not a living thing.
Yeah.
Mushrooms are, I mean, water's living.
Water contains living organisms in it, but the water itself is not living. Maybe. All right, so let's move on. These are, speaking of that, the next kingdom, Protists, includes a lot of organisms that you might find in pond water. Okay? Protists are unicellular, so they're single celled. They're still eukaryotes. They do have a nucleus. And some of these protists are autotrophs, and some are heterotrophs. It depends on the actual species. And these are what we're going to be looking at. We'll look at preserved slides at the end of the week. We'll look at living specimens next week of all three of these protists. This is a protist called Euglena. This is an amoeba. This is a paramecium. Okay, so we'll look at all three of those and study them in more detail next week.
Are we going to leave no examples for anything?
Yeah. And that leaves us with two kingdoms left. And these are probably the kingdoms you're least familiar with. So yeah, bacteria and archaea. So bacteria, what would you say about the number of cells? What's the word we use? Unicellular. Bacteria are unicellular. And they are actually prokaryotes. So this is the first group we studied. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have other organelles that have a membrane around them. Their DNA is just kind of scattered within their cytoplasm. So they are prokaryotes. They're simpler cells than all of the others. And some of them are heterotrophs, and some are autotrophs. Things like blue-green algae are autotrophs. They can use sun's energy to make food. Others, like strep bacteria, are heterotrophs. So bacteria include some things that are harmful, but also some that are helpful. anyone name a bacteria that is harmful?
Germs.
When we say when we use the word germ, we're sort of talking about any harmful microbe, really. But let's be more specific. Tatum? Strep bacteria. Strep throat is caused by a bacteria called Streptococcus bacteria, and that's what causes strep throat. How about another one you probably learned about in home and careers? Anybody?
Did you get one?
Salmonella. Good.
Did you get one?
E. coli. Good. So those are bacteria that could cause food poisoning. These are bacteria that sometimes live on things like, chicken or beef. And if we consume them, they could cause us to become ill.
Is that why you don't eat chicken?
No, not necessarily. But it is what you have to be sure of when you're cooking meat at home or anywhere.
Okay, you have to make sure that it gets to a certain temperature or else there will be E. coli or salmonella on
Yes.
it and you will die.
You won't necessarily die. You may not necessarily get food poisoning, but yes, you're correct. Foods have to be cooked up to a certain temperature because when you reach that temperature, these organisms, these bacteria, cannot survive any longer. For example, if you cook your chicken to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, that kills any salmonella bacteria that might be on your chicken, and therefore it can't make you sick. And so that's why there's those certain temperatures. If you eat like a steak and it's really rare, it probably has not been brought up to the highest temperature it should have. Rare is, some restaurants won't serve like a rare steak because of the risk that there may be still living E. coli.
So what's medium rare? Is that like?
Medium rare is usually, it depends, there's different temperatures. Like I think rare is like 130, 135. Then medium rare might be like 140 and so forth. But there are some bacteria that are actually helpful. We have a whole host of bacteria that live in our gut, our digestive system. They help us digest certain foods, provide to us certain vitamins. So there are beneficial bacteria as well. If you look on a container of yogurt, you'll see it has bacteria in it. They are used to make the yogurt, and they're also good for your body as well. And that leads to the last kingdom, Archaea. So Archaea was a kingdom that really came into use relatively recently because scientists didn't know about these organisms before. And there are areas such as in hot springs, deep ocean trenches where gases from inside the earth come out, in extreme salt conditions, in extremely acidic conditions. And scientists had thought, well, nothing would ever be able to survive there, no bacteria or protists or anything else. But actually, once they started exploring a little further, they found that these extreme areas actually contain living organisms. And then as they looked at them, they found that they're not bacteria, but they have different types of cell walls. They have a different structure to the cells. And they started this kingdom called same DNA, though.
They're the same DNA as bacteria.
Yeah, same structure.
Well, same
A's, T's,
structure,
and
but
C's.
different DNA.
Yes.
And it is so different, they have to put them in a different domain.
Yes.
But, are you familiar with Charles Brown?
Yes, I know.
Very familiar?
Yes. So, Archaea,
That's all you have to say?
that's all I have to say, yes. Are unicellular, also prokaryote. They're autotrophic. And so sometimes they're called extremophiles because they were discovered in these very extreme conditions. Within that category, there are some called halophiles. Not because they like the video game, but because they could live in extreme salt conditions.
Wait, what can?
These halophiles, they're a type of Archaea. They live in super, super salty conditions that nothing else can survive in. Thermophiles can live in very extreme what?
Heat.
Heat. Like in these geysers. When we look at all of the known species that scientists have sort of categorize. The vast majority of species that we know about are animals. About 3/4 are animals. In fact, over half are just insects alone. And then this section is other animals. The next biggest group of identified species are plants. Again, they take up maybe, I don't know, an eighth or so. And then all the other groups we talked about are much smaller pieces of the overall identified species. The mushrooms and the fungi, the bacteria, protists, algae, things like that. So, now, why is this? Is it because 3/4 of all species on Earth are actually animals? Yeah.
Okay, so we know more about insects, but there's a lot more insects because they're small, there's more of them, and we know more about other animals because we see them a lot more, and not microscopic. Plants are like,
Yeah.
so I don't hit them.
You're exactly right. These things are all much more visible and obvious to humans because of our size and our scale. There's probably just as many protists and bacteria and so forth, but they're much harder for us to observe and study. All right, any questions about the 6 kingdoms?
Nope.
Okay, I want to show you the brain pop.
A brain.
A brain pop.